1. My partner is a 52-year-old man, and I am a 39-year-old woman, have been married for over 7 years and have 4 children together. When we first met and had our first child, we lived very close to my mother-in-law. During the first year, I noticed lots of red flags that I let slide, because I was so happy to have found a partner who was such a great match for me. Mother-in-law would frequently show up to our first home with various pieces of furniture or kitchen items, which I initially thought was kind, but I began to realize that each of these gifts came with strings attached, giving her a sense of ownership over our home. Money is her love language. There were very few days when I would come home from work without finding her car in the driveway. When my first child was born, mother-in-law wanted to be present in the delivery room, but I insisted that she give us space. Needless to say, she hung around the waiting room, called my partner frequently for updates, and was in the delivery room within 15 minutes of me giving birth. I was still bloodied and shaking, clutching my newborn to my bare breasts, and yet, there she was, trying to snap pictures. Fast forward 6 months, and my partner decides he wants to move our family closer to my parents and siblings because of lower cost of living. Every day between that decision and the day we moved was a horrendous fight with the mother-in-law, slinging insults about the place we would be moving to, and getting into screaming matches with my partner. After the move, the mother-in-law still inserted herself in our lives and decisions, frequently offering unsolicited advice and jabs at the slightest choices we make. I mean things like whether we drink sparkling water. "Well, that's bad for your teeth," she would say. Or whether we would use an essential oil diffuser in our home. "Well, I had better not have to breathe that stuff when I come to visit," she would say. Fast forward to the birth of my 3rd child. My partner took 3 weeks off from work to spend time with our other kids because my pregnancy had been quite difficult. The mother-in-law shows up and essentially demands my partner help her redo our backyard landscaping. So he spends 3 weeks at her beck and call, only giving me his time when I was in labor and giving birth. Fast forward again to my 4th child. Worst pregnancy I've ever had, compounded by fibromyalgia. My other kids were sensitive to the changes in the house and in a state of turmoil. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law calls my partner and insists that we host his sister in our home for 4 weeks after I give birth. I'm talking the day after I give birth, for crying out loud. She frames it as unavoidable because of a knee replacement surgery that ended up being cancelled. I felt like I wasn't given a choice. I love my sister-in-law, who needs assistance with day-to-day living, but I didn't want to host anyone right after giving birth, and yet I did. I took care of my baby, my other kids, and my sister-in-law, leaving my needs last and allowing postpartum depression to smolder and burn in the background. When I voiced concerns about the negative impact the extra guest was having on our household, I was accused of being unwelcoming and bitchy. That was a year ago. In the meantime, the mother-in-law has been involved in planning a major trip for our nuclear family without my consent. She scheduled a visit without consulting me about my work schedule, and now she is involved with planning a work trip my partner is taking. This stepping in has happened so many times throughout our marriage, and I have addressed it numerous times with my partner, but now her slightest involvement or input sets me the hell off. Is she being too intrusive? Is my partner being too permissive? Or am I just crazy? I've just given the snapshots of some of the mother-in-law's behavior. Seriously, this would be a novel length if I included everything. Hellfreezer's note. I think you need to get used to the notion of her seeing you as unwelcoming and bitchy and become that. If she's accusing you of it, embody it. Do whatever it takes to keep her as far away from your home as is reasonable. Limit visits. Just don't open the door if she comes when you're over. It doesn't come across that your husband's supporting you much, and he definitely needs to be more active in supporting you and enforcing these boundaries. Because right now, you don't have a healthy relationship with your mother-in-law, and the only way that health is going to improve is if she's somewhere away from you. And you need to get a lot more comfortable with saying no. You could add the word bitch to it at the end if you want to, but you have to get comfortable with saying no. 2. I'm a 23-year-old woman. I feel horrible because I do not have a single nice thing to say about my mother-in-law who is 50. The moment we announced our engagement, she told my now husband, 24, when we have to have it, so she could invite her mum and have it be convenient for her new house. She also took credit for how she raised him because of the way he proposed. Darling husband is in the army, so we decided to elope with 2 witnesses. Friends, so no family, were treated differently, and planned to celebrate with people in our own ways afterwards. This was because some family are in other countries, and because we could plan a whole big wedding, just to be told it can't go ahead due to his job. When he told mother-in-law our plans, I wasn't present, she had a meltdown. She's saying he's her only son, and warned it would upset his whole family. She blamed the whole decision on me, and he corrected her, but she wouldn't hear it. He asked her to try to celebrate with him, to go soot shopping, etc., and she blew him off completely. I find this infuriating, as she'd offered to take me wedding dress shopping at the start of our relationship, before darling husband even mentioned engagement. I hadn't even met her yet. She managed to speak to his family about our plans before us, so for our entire engagement, everyone has acted like our wedding wasn't happening. I know he wasn't expecting congratulations, gifts, and cards, but everyone refused to talk about it, ask about it, anything. We're now married, and couldn't be happier, but darling husband is very upset. On our wedding day, he's not heard from a single member of his family. Not a text or a phone call to check in. Mother-in-law has always been frosty with me, saying I was stealing her son, that we live too far away, my hometown. He moved in with me, and referring to him coming home. He stays on camp in the week, as going to my house. He corrects her when necessary, but she won't listen. I'd like to add that she complains about us living too far away all the time. It's 4 hours drive. But her own mother lives in a separate country. We've offered for her to come visit, but she only gives us times when she's available, and knows we're not, so all the traveling is put on us. She's made so many digs, including how a car makes you happier than a relationship, and is now just icing him out completely. Darling husband has commented on the digs before, but she said they weren't digs, just misunderstood jokes, and brushed it off. His birthday was during our engagement, and she sent him a £30 bank transfer on a card. On mother-in-law's birthday, before our engagement, darling husband bought some expensive gifts and drove up to spend time with her, even though she set no time aside to actually see him, going so far as to invite his grandparents over and not invite him up, until he asked what her plans were. This is our first Christmas married. She sent us presents in the post and not asked about plans or suggested us meeting up at all. We didn't even know the gifts were being posted until they arrived. Please tell me if there's anything I've overlooked. I know it must be disappointing not coming to your child's wedding. My parents found it hard, but were still so supportive. How do we move forward? Any advice is greatly appreciated. Hellfreezer's note. I know it's become somewhat cliché with stories like this, involving mother-in-laws, but the way you move forward is without her. If she's not putting the effort in, neither should either of you. Just let that relationship die if she's not willing to put the effort in. And if you and your partner decide to have children, she'll come sniffing around. Remind her that she wasn't there for you when it counted before, so she doesn't get to be there now. It's appalling that she seems to have the rest of the family so under her thumb that they didn't support either of you during what should have been a very happy time for you, but that loss is on them. Think of all the money you'll save in Christmas gifts and birthdays and wedding presents, given that none of them supported you. 3. This happened some time after Evil Mama Bear moved away, and I just didn't feel like posting about it until now, because this year, my mother passed away. But apparently Evil Mama Bear has reconnected with her childhood best friend when she moved back to Texas. I've decided to refer to this woman as Nosy Nancy. I remember Evil Mama Bear mentioning her from time to time while I was growing up, and she kept a picture of this woman and her together as teenagers as well. They lost contact in the 80s when Evil Mama Bear moved away, but they reconnected when she moved back. This bitch is just like her, at least I think so. My knowledge of her is very limited. She didn't have any sort of social media from what I could tell at the time, but she did have an eardrum scratching, smoked for over 40 years kind of voice. I guess after reconnecting with her, Evil Mama Bear told her all the lies she's been trying to use against me for years, because Nosy Nancy called me and my sister and blasted us with gaslighting blame. There had been nothing from Evil Mama Bear for months after she'd finally sold her house and left town for good. But back in her hometown, she was probably telling people there Lord knows what about us. I figured she'd twist the story to make herself the victim wherever she ended up. But it seems that she was able to recruit at least one person to her side. Knowing Evil Mama Bear, she probably put on quite the tear-jerker to get Nosy Nancy to do this for her. I was at work in my office when I got a call from an unknown number on my cell. I answered it, and I heard that scratchy voice of Nosy Nancy for the first time. She gave me her full name, which I immediately wrote down, and then asked if she was addressing me by giving my real name. I confirmed that it was me. Then she instantly went off on me about Evil Mama Bear. Apparently she had been staying with her while her new house was being built or something, and she said Evil Mama Bear told her all about me. She started spouting off about how I took the house she was meant to inherit from my father, claimed I doctored his will, said I poisoned my sister against her, and even stated I let my sister marry I won't repeat it, but it was a racial slur, before I chased Evil Mama Bear out of town and made her lose everything. So yeah, this woman not only had the completely wrong idea about what happened, she sounded just like another stupid racist. She sure can't pick 'em. I calmly listened to Nosy Nancy's rant, then told her that everything she just said was wrong, but I wasn't about to go into that with her. So I just pointed out that I had an active restraining order against Evil Mama Bear, and that if Nosy Nancy was calling on her behalf, that makes her an accessory to a breach of the restraining order. Nancy didn't believe me, but I pointed out that there's many good reasons why I had a restraining order against her, and have plenty of evidence to back that up, but I wouldn't bother to defend myself to a flying monkey like her, just to prove my point. And if she ever called me again, I would go to the police and file a report for harassment. The call was recorded on my business line. I have her full name and number, as well as the recorded evidence of her harassment, and if she bothered me again, I would use it. She hung up straight away. I called my lawyer about what happened, and he wanted me to give him the call recording. So I had it copied to a thumb drive and was going to deliver it to him as soon as I was off for the day. But after a couple of hours, my sister called me furious. Nosy Nancy had called her as well. Evil Mama Bear somehow had my sister's, at the time, current number. Looking back, my sister got calls from the hospital when Evil Mama Bear fell and hurt herself. How did they get the number after my sister got a new one months prior? My sister got a bit meek when I pointed this out and finally admitted that she did call Evil Mama Bear to yell at her one time last year after she'd had her baby. Her husband did not know she did this, or at least not then. They've since changed her numbers again. Sis said she knew it was stupid, but she just felt like she needed the last word against Evil Mama Bear after my nephew was born. She said that she just wasn't thinking straight, and before she knew it, she was dialing the phone, and her number would have been in Evil Mama Bear's call log after that. My sister said she blocked the number right after calling her, but the damage was done. She was afraid to tell anyone because a restraining order goes both ways, and Sis breached it in calling her. So we kinda just let it go, and nothing more really came of it. Thankfully, hopefully, this situation didn't repeat, as none of us heard from Nosy Nancy or any other flying monkey ever again. I really didn't want to deal with any more of this nonsense. Evil Mama Bear had left, and she needed to stay gone. But she didn't stay gone. This was supposed to be over, it wasn't. 4. So here's the context of the situation. It was the beginning of this month, and I live in an RV park, and weather has been beginning to get frigid, almost, and my crappy heater wasn't cutting the cold out of my home. I was literally staying in one of those extreme weather sleeping bags because I was so cold. And one day I had enough and sort of begged someone for tips on how to keep my RV at least habitable, and about 30 minutes or so later, someone insisted on sending me a heater. Now, here's where the post starts getting a little happier. After they confirmed where to send the heater and everything else, they basically kept me updated on where it was. And when it arrived, they made sure I had it. Well, this is where it goes downhill in a sense. The day the heater arrived, it was pouring, so my landlady told my neighbor to keep it for me until I got back home, and she did so. Well, one day when I got home, my mom was with me and saw the box on my front steps. I decided to play clueless because she didn't give two craps about if I was okay with freezing or whatever, and two, it's none of her damn business what I do. She doesn't pay my bills, nor does she live with me. And here's where I might be the a-hole. I knew she was sort of stressed out about having to get revised knee surgery, and when she called me to harass me the next day about it, I got sick of her crap and hung up, and she tried the self-pity route, and I called her bluff, and she said fine by me. Now here's where the ultimatum comes. She basically left voicemail, saying that I better tell her who had sent me a heater or else I won't be part of the family Christmas this year. 5. I've known I have a just no mill for forever. Hubby and I have been together for 17 years and married for 14, and she's been toxic the entire time. Here's some highlights of the abuse and general bad behavior we've dealt with over the years. I have a child from a previous marriage whose sperm donor, I refuse to call him his father, when he did nothing but contribute to the conception of said child, is generally a deadbeat and a POS. He signed his rights away to my son shortly after I married my hubby, and hubby didn't think twice to adopt him. He's the only dad my son has ever known, and they have an amazing relationship. I also have a daughter with hubby who is 3 years younger than my son. Interestingly enough, my mother-in-law had 2 children from a prior relationship who were adopted from my husband's father when they were young. She constantly complains that her children's grandparents on my father-in-law's side treated my hubby and their non-biological grandkids differently, to anyone who will listen. So you'd think when my hubby adopted my son she'd be different, right? Wrong. She has a years-long track record of coming to my daughter's birthday parties and school events, and having a headache for almost every single one of my sons. She would take daughter on shopping trips to buy her anything she wanted, and would give my son $10 to make it fair. She always wanted my daughter to come over for sleepovers, but never even asked if my son would like to. The list goes on and on. This had been the topic of lots of heartache for years in our house because I noticed, the kids noticed, my husband noticed, and nobody liked it. But the thing you have to understand about my mother-in-law is that as far as she is concerned, she is perfect. She never does anything wrong, and if she did, it was your fault. Trying to tell her that she's hurt your feelings is a futile effort, because she will go absolutely bat-crap crazy on anyone who dares to imply that she is less than perfect, and the smear campaign begins. My husband would always tell me that one day he would reach his breaking point with the unfairness in how she treated our children, and say something to her, so to avoid rocking the boat, I just sat back and tolerated it far longer than I should have, waiting for that day to come. Some other fun highlights are when I was overweight. Anytime my daughter would spend time with mother-in-law, she would come home talking about how mommy is so fat. We'd ask her why she would say that and explain that it was hurtful, and her response would always be, "Grandma told me." One time, when she was keeping the kids, I dropped my car keys into the trunk of my car in accident, and they were locked inside. My car had to be towed to the dealership to free my keys. But I know she didn't like keeping the kids longer than expected, so I called to let her know what was going on, and offered that if she wanted to meet me at the dealership, which was maybe 2 miles from her house, that she could drop them off with me and I would take them off her hands. I also apologized profusely for the inconvenience, even though it was a total accident. For this, she screamed at my mother in the parking lot of said dealership about how disrespectful I was, called my husband at work to scream at him about how disrespectful I was of her time, and genuinely expected him to choose her side and leave me over it. I could tell so many more stories, but hopefully you'll get what I've been dealing with here. We've had limited contact with her for a while, just in an effort to protect our peace and limit her opportunities to display her preference for our daughter. As the kids have gotten older, they have also made it clear that they don't want much to do with her because of the way she treats my son and others. If you can't treat them equally, then we'll remove your opportunities to remind them of that kind of thing. But the one thing we didn't do is unfriend or block her on social media, which I guess we should have, but we also knew that doing so would send her into a rage, and we've been trying to avoid her drama as much as possible. I don't post much on social media, but I do like to brag on my kids and their accomplishments. Every time the post is about our son, it's crickets from my mother-in-law. No like, no comment, no nothing. But if it's something about my daughter, she's all over it like cheese on rice. The most recent instance of this is where my husband finally reached the previously mentioned breaking point. She commented on an achievement of my daughter's, implying that my daughter spends several days a week at her house. Not true. Daughter hasn't spent any significant time with mother-in-law in years for many reasons. And stating that she just knew daughter was going to be insert career here that is relative to the accomplishment and has nothing to do with my daughter's actual future career interests. My husband texted mother-in-law letting her know that we do not appreciate how she has always treated our kids differently, that she should know better, that it's hypocritical to do this given that she accuses his grandparents of the same. He finally put down a boundary, that either she will start treating them equally, or she will not be welcome in our house or around either one of our kids. He was factual and straightforward with her, but really, given the years of her antics that she had been allowed to get by with, he took it easy on her. Cue the smear campaign. Now lies about both of us are being told to anyone in hubby's family that will listen. She's saying that hubby was abusive towards her, that we are abusive toward our kids by allowing them to form their own opinions of her based on her behavior. And my favorite one, I'm apparently a manipulative bitch, and I've lied about everything ever, and I have brainwashed my husband and children into treating her this way. I knew the smear campaign was coming, but I wasn't prepared for how much it would bother me to hear the blatant lies she is telling anyone who will listen. I'm also worried that she's just psychotic enough to start really trying to hurt us by making false accusations to other areas like our jobs or law enforcement. Any advice, encouragement, virtual hugs, I'll take any of it I can right now. Hellfreezer's note. All I would say is right now, document any communications you have with her or anyone who tells you that things she's said, if they're sending text messages or anything like that. Document as much as you can, just so you've got evidence you can point to and say, look, she has a history of instability. I certainly hope the people that she's mouthing off to aren't giving her any credence, because surely they must know what she's like. And I'm so sorry you and your husband have to deal with this. It is definitely disappointing when you realize a family member is not the person you hoped they would be. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to The Impractical Proudness of Parents, Ipop, episode 138. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please hit the like button, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And do support me on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Even $1 is very helpful. Okay, I don't think we have any more business today, so let's move on to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... Okay, I'm not sure when this story is going up. We will have a couple... Let's see... Yeah, I'll be into a new week by the time New Year's Eve starts. But I'll ask you now, what are your plans for New Year's Eve, if you plan any at all? I usually do a stream on New Year's Eve, I have for the past few years. But I don't know if I'm gonna this year. I might... I've just not been feeling streams lately, but I might do one. Maybe just do a little bit of gaming for a couple of hours to see in the new year. And I'll chat to anyone who happens to be around. But let me know what you think in a comment below. I'd love to hear what your plans are. And before we go, let's take a look at the answer of the day from a previous video. And today's answer comes from Ipop 137. And the question was... When was the last time you let someone tell you something you know is not true? They're not necessarily lying to you. They might believe it, but you know it's not true. And you've decided, you know what? I'm not going to fight it. I'm just going to let it happen, and we'll see how it plays out. With me, I was citing getting smart meters installed and been told how it would be no problem at all, and knowing it was going to be difficult, and sure enough it was. And the electricity meter was actually installed, very little problems. That's actually working fine. It does what it does. I can actually top up from home, which is the only draw on getting it in. The gas meter, which was the one that was going to cause the problems, is still causing problems. And at the meter's end, it's technically working, but they've not switched it. It starts as a credit meter, i.e. you just use what you use and you get a bill. Don't want that. Don't like that. I don't like getting bills with that kind of thing. I like to be able to track the cost of the usage. I like to know I'm putting a certain amount in and keep an eye on what's coming out of it. And I can just top it up randomly if I need to. That was the appeal of getting the smart meter, so I could do it at any time. But it didn't switch over to prepay like it was meant to. So I'm currently dealing with them trying to do that. And today's answer comes from Grey Warden Invasion. Happens often enough with a colleague of mine, often also in the form of an accusatory-sounding "you did that" kind of email with the boss in CC. They've so far always ran into a wall, though, because I don't do any of my work without documentation. There's often not even a need for my reply, because just 5 seconds of looking into something would have been enough to find my added documents. Thank you very much for your answer, Grey Warden. And with that, I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.